What was the single worst year in all of human history? Most people guess a world war or the Black Death. But ask the historians who actually study this, and they give a very different answer. Their pick is not a famous war and not even the most infamous plague. It was not 1918 when a deadly flu killed tens of millions of people. And it was not 1349 when the Black Death wiped out half of Europe. It was a year almost no one alive today has even heard of, 536. The year the sun went dark, and much of the world was plunged into a year and a half of twilight. This is what the worst year in human history actually looked like. And the strangest part of all is how it began, with the sky itself. Picture a sky that slowly seems to forget how to shine. It began, by all the surviving accounts, in the early months of the year 536. A strange, dry fog crept across the sky and simply refused to leave. Day after day it hung over the land, slowly swallowing the light. No wind seemed to clear it, and no rain ever washed it away. The sun dimmed until it gave only a pale, feeble light, like a permanent eclipse. A Byzantine historian wrote that the sun shone without brightness, like the moon, all year long. It was as though someone had thrown a gray blanket across the entire sky. A Roman senator described the sun glowing a strange bluish color, its heat oddly weak. Most chilling of all, he wrote that at noon, human bodies cast almost no shadow at all. To the people living through it, this was not just strange weather. It felt like the end of the world. From Constantinople to the distant edges of Asia, the very same dread was recorded. They had no idea what was happening or whether the light would ever return. Priests prayed, crowds panicked, and strange omens filled the records of the age. And the darkness did not pass in a few days or even a few weeks. Account after account agrees, the dim sky lasted for around 18 long months. That is a year and a half with no real summer and barely any true daylight. Some wrote that the sun shone for only about 4 hours each day, and even then, only faintly. It was as if a single endless night had settled over much of the known world. The psychological toll of it alone would have been almost unbearable. Imagine waking each morning to a sky that never truly brightened. With the sunlight gone, the warmth went with it, and the temperatures collapsed. That summer became one of the coldest in over 2,000 years. Snow reportedly fell in the middle of summer in China, where it never should. Across Europe and Asia, people shivered through a summer that never truly arrived. Lakes and rivers froze when they should have flowed, and the land stayed locked in cold. Livestock weakened and died in fields that had turned hard and gray. But the cold and the dark were only the beginning of the nightmare. Crops need sunlight and warmth to grow, and now there was almost none of either. Across the world, harvests withered and failed right there in the fields. Olive trees, grain, and vineyards alike simply could not survive the cold and gloom. Ancient Irish records bluntly note a failure of bread from 536 onward. Stored grain ran out, and there was nothing left to replace it. With the harvest gone, hunger spread like a slow creeping shadow. Famine gripped entire regions, and countless people simply starved. For the poorest families, even a single failed harvest could be a death sentence. Desperate and hungry, whole populations began to migrate and turn against one another. The very fabric of society began to tear apart under the strain. Trade routes emptied out, and once busy markets fell silent. For nearly 1,500 years, no one truly knew what had caused it. The ancient accounts of a darkened sun were often dismissed as exaggeration or myth. Then modern science finally cracked the centuries-old mystery wide open. The answer was hidden, frozen, in one of the most unlikely places on Earth. Researchers drilled deep into an ancient glacier high in the Swiss Alps. Layer by frozen layer, the ice held a record of the sky going back thousands of years. Each yearly layer had trapped a tiny snapshot of the ancient atmosphere. And in the layer for 536, they found the smoking gun. Tiny traces of volcanic ash blasted into the sky by a colossal eruption. Most likely a massive volcano had violently erupted in Iceland in early 536. It hurled an immense veil of ash and sulfur high into the upper atmosphere. Tiny particles of sulfur hung in the air for years, reflecting the sun's rays back into space. That veil spread across the entire northern half of the planet, blocking out the sun. It is the very same mechanism behind the largest, deadliest eruptions in all of history. This was an eruption powerful enough to change the climate of the entire planet. Ancient tree rings told the very same grim story, recording years of stunted frozen growth. And then, almost unbelievably, it got even worse. Because the eruption of 536 was not the only one to strike. The Earth, it seemed, was not finished with the 6th century just yet. More massive eruptions struck again in the years 540 and 547. Each one threw fresh ash into the sky and deepened the bitter, killing cold. What should have been a single terrible year stretched into a brutal, freezing decade. The cold reached so far that even distant Peru suffered crippling droughts. Scientists now call it the late antique Little Ice Age, and it lasted over 100 years. Generation after generation grew up under colder, harsher, darker skies. As if endless darkness and famine were not enough, something far worse was coming. In the year 541, a deadly plague arrived at a busy Egyptian port. It had likely traveled silently aboard ships, hidden away among the grain. It was the bubonic plague, the same horror that would one day become the Black Death. It spread with terrifying speed through a population already starving and weakened. Bodies broken by years of famine had little strength left to fight it. Historians believe it killed between a third and a half of the Eastern Roman Empire. In the great city of Constantinople, the dead piled up faster than they could be buried. At the very peak of it, thousands of people were dying every single day. Survivors described a horror that was almost beyond words. An empire that had ruled for centuries was pushed to the very brink of collapse. It would never again fully recover the power it once held. Darkness, famine, and plague all crashing down within just a few short years. This is exactly why historians point not to the Black Death, but to 536. It was not a single disaster, but a chain of them, each one feeding the next. A darkened sky led to famine, and famine left people defenseless against plague. When the light finally returned, it never quite found the same world it had left. Kingdoms fell, whole populations scattered, and an old order crumbled away. The world that finally emerged was poorer, smaller, and far more afraid. It took many generations for civilization to slowly climb back out of the gloom. Some say this was the true beginning of what we once called the Dark Ages. For 18 long months, the sun hung in the sky as a pale, lifeless ghost. The people who lived through it were utterly certain the world was ending. And for the world they knew, in so many ways it truly was. A single distant volcano had reached out across the entire planet. It dimmed the sun, starved whole nations, and helped topple an empire. All from a catastrophe the world would not truly understand for 15 centuries. It reshaped empires, ended dynasties, and quietly changed the course of history. The worst year in human history was not written in blood, but in shadow. And it all began the day the sky simply stopped giving light. Follow to see history the way it actually looked.